Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, now, let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story.
Clara hadn't meant to drive this far. Not really. The letter had been sitting on her desk for weeks, yellowed and folded with trembling care, like whoever wrote it had known it would travel through time more than distance. But today, something in her broke. An urge, sudden and sourceless, had guided her to pack a small overnight bag and drive north along the highway until the sun vanished behind walls of fog and pine. It was the sort of house that shouldn't be there. She'd seen it once before, maybe in a dream, or in the folds of her grandmother's bedtime stories, the kind whispered after dark with the bedroom door shut tight. The marshland around it pulsed softly with distant insect life, but the house was unnervingly still, untouched by sound or wind. The directions from the letter had been strange. Drive until the trees thin. When the road turns to gravel, count to 300, stop at the willow. She did, and sure enough, through a thinning curtain of mist, the house had materialized like a secret finally remembered. It rose 3 stories high, black wood warped with age and weeping green moss. Its narrow windows blinked like shut eyes behind curtains that moved without wind. A tangle of chimney pipes jutted from the steep slate roof like cracked fingers pointing at the sky. There was no address, no mailbox, no path save for the one her tires had carved in the soft gravel. Clara hesitated. She should turn back, but something, some breathless, childish curiosity, kept her rooted to the spot. She stepped out of the car and crunched over the gravel toward the house. The mud tugged slightly at her boots with each step. The air had weight here. It smelled like lavender, iron, and wet stone. The kind of scent you remembered from basements you never dared enter again. As she reached the porch, she noticed something carved into the wooden beam by the door. A word. Clara. Her name. Her name was etched with shallow, careful strokes, as if the blade had trembled. The lettering looked old, faded into the wood grain, but it hadn't been there long enough to rot. Clara ran her finger across it. The carving felt recent. The edges were still slightly raised. Her skin prickled with a strange familiarity, as if the wood had remembered her first. She stepped back. The fog wrapped gently around her shoulders like a shawl. The silence was too complete. Not the peaceful kind, but the sort that waits. Behind her, the road was vanishing inch by inch, swallowed by the creeping mist. Turning back was no longer an option. Clara reached for the doorknob and paused. It was ice cold. With a breath held tight in her throat, she turned it. The door opened inward with a groan so long and low it sounded almost mournful. Inside, the air was warm, but not welcoming. It carried a scent like dried flowers mixed with something older, something sharp and sweet like mold hiding behind lace curtains. The entryway was dim. Light filtered in through tall, thin windows high along the walls, where the fog pressed like an animal trying to get inside. Dust motes spun slowly in the stillness, dancing through light beams that barely reached the floor. Clara's boots clicked softly on the black and white tile as she stepped inside. The floor was dry, but her socks felt damp already. She closed the door behind her. The lock clicked shut with no help from her hand. "Hello?" she called, her voice muffled by the thick air. Silence answered. To her right was a sitting room, parlor maybe. It looked untouched, like someone had set down a book mid-sentence and never picked it up again. A cracked teacup sat on a lace doily beside a deep green velvet chair. There was a peaceful fireplace, and above it, a portrait. The woman in the painting was pale, with hair like river weed and eyes that looked like they'd seen the inside of a coffin. Her lips were drawn in the faintest smile, not warmth, but memory. Clara stared back at her. The woman didn't blink. She turned away, uncomfortable. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock began to tick.
Tick, tick, tick. It was a gentle rhythm at first, barely louder than her heartbeat. But it seemed to grow stronger with each second she stood there, like the house itself was marking her presence, counting how long she stayed. She followed the sound through a wide archway into a dim hallway. The wallpaper was peeling, faded floral print curling at the edges like the dried skin of something once living. As she passed a small end table, Clara noticed a silver-framed photograph. The image inside was so faded it was hard to make out, but she could see two figures standing in front of the house. One of them looked like a child. The other, a tall man with dark eyes, had his hand on the child's shoulder. The child's face had been scratched out. Her stomach tightened. She moved on. The clock was louder now, coming from a room on the left. She opened the door slowly. It was a study. Books lined every wall, their spines dulled by dust. A grandfather clock stood in the far corner, tall and regal, its pendulum swinging with impossible precision. Its face read 3:12. Clara stepped closer. As she did, the ticking grew erratic, slowing, then speeding up again. She watched, breath held, as the minute hand began to move backward. Tick, 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 tick. Then, silence. The pendulum froze mid-swing. Clara took a step back. Her foot bumped something on the floor. A journal splayed open. She crouched and picked it up. The handwriting was cramped and shaky. She came again last night, sat in the rocking chair, and smiled at me. I told her to leave. She only smiled wider, said the girl was coming soon. The entry was dated October 11th, 1962. Clara swallowed hard. She flipped to the last page. It ended mid-sentence. If the girl arrives, the house must decide. It always... The rest was torn. She stared at the page, chills crawling up her arms. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Clara turned quickly, clutching the journal against her chest. The study behind her was empty, but the air had shifted, heavier, closer, like someone had just been standing behind her, watching. The door she'd left open had swung halfway shut. She stepped toward it slowly, trying to ignore how the silence pressed into her ears, muting even the sound of her breath. The only noise now was the distant drip of something in another room, irregular and soft, like water sliding down stone, or blood. She shook the thought from her head. The hallway was waiting, quiet and dim. She turned back to place the journal on the desk. Something told her it belonged there. As she did, her eyes caught something carved at the edge of the desk's wood. Letters, just like the name on the porch. C.L. It stopped, half finished. A chill traced her spine. She stepped out of the study and moved further down the hallway. As she passed a doorway, a breeze slid across her skin, even though the windows were closed. It smelled faintly of lavender again, and something sourer underneath, decay. She came to a staircase, narrow and crooked, It wound upward into darkness. The banister was twisted oak, smooth from generations of hands. Above her, the second floor yawned open, shadowy and silent. Clara hesitated, hand resting lightly on the first banister rung. She remembered what her grandmother used to say during those eerie stories before bed. The house doesn't wake until someone remembers it. She hadn't understood that as a child. Now she wasn't so sure. She climbed the stairs slowly, her steps muffled by an old runner that had once been red, now faded to the color of dried rust. Each step groaned beneath her weight, but she kept going, heart thudding louder than the creaks. At the top was a long hallway with 7 doors, all identical, all closed. Except the last one. It was slightly ajar. As Clara stepped forward, one of the other doors creaked behind her. She turned, eyes wide, but all the doors were shut. She wasn't alone anymore.
Clara's breath hitched in her throat. The air was different up here, heavier, like it had been held too long in someone else's lungs. She looked down the corridor again, 7 doors, one ajar at the far end. The others stood perfectly still, but she could have sworn she heard one breathe. Not open, not shut, breathe. She moved forward slowly, her boots whispering across the faded rug. The walls here bore old picture frames, but the glass had long since fogged over or cracked. Shapes moved behind the haze, portraits of long-dead faces that seemed to watch her without eyes. She paused at the 3rd door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she leaned closer. No sound, no breath, but her skin prickled, her scalp tightening as if something stood just beyond the wood, ear pressed to the same spot. Listening. She jerked her hand away. A soft creak echoed behind her. The rocking chair. It was coming from the room at the end of the hall, the one with the open door. She stepped forward, pulled as if by strings. The walls seemed to lean inward with each step, the hallway narrowing as if the house were closing around her. She reached the door, pushed it open with the edge of her hand. The room was dim, lit only by the gray haze of fog seeping through the windows. The wallpaper had peeled almost entirely away, leaving behind raw wood and faded outlines where furniture once stood. A cracked mirror hung on the far wall, warped and streaked, reflecting a distorted image of the room. And in the corner, the rocking chair moved, back and forth, empty, or so she thought, until she saw it in the mirror, a shape, faint, sitting in the chair. A woman, pale, hair hanging in damp ropes, black dress like shadow pooled around her feet. Clara whirled around. Nothing. But in the mirror, the woman was still rocking, still smiling. Clara stepped backward, eyes locked on the mirror. The woman sat perfectly still in the reflection, hands folded in her lap, head tilted ever so slightly to one side. That smile was wrong. Not kind, not cruel, just knowing, like she remembered something Clara hadn't learned yet. Who are you?" she whispered, voice cracking. The woman in the mirror tilted her head further, as if listening. Then, without blinking, she raised one hand, just a few inches, palm out. Clara gasped and looked over her shoulder. Still no one. But when she turned back to the mirror, the rocking chair had stopped moving. The woman was gone. And the mirror had changed. It no longer reflected the room behind Clara. Now it showed a hallway. The very hallway Clara had just walked down. She watched in mounting dread as a figure emerged from one of the closed doors, tall, thin, with impossibly long arms. It moved like it was part of the fog, dragging itself silently along the rug. Its face was hidden. Its hands were wrong, too many fingers. It crept slowly down the hall toward the room she stood in. Clara stepped back, nearly tripping over the chair. No! She turned and flung open the door. The hallway was empty, but colder now, and the fog was leaking in under the windowsills, curling like smoke around her boots. She reached out and pulled the door shut behind her, pressing her weight against it as though something might already be following. From the other side of the wood, she heard breathing, low, wet, close. She backed away, eyes never leaving the doorknob. It turned, slowly, deliberately, but didn't open. Not yet.
Clara stumbled backward until the backs of her knees hit the edge of the bed. An old iron-framed thing draped in a moth-eaten coverlet that released a puff of dust into the air. She sat down hard, her breath hitching in shallow gasps, her eyes locked on that doorknob. It twitched once more, then stopped. Silence returned. She listened, heart pounding. No footsteps, no breath, only the faint creak of the house shifting around her like an animal, turning in its sleep. What was that thing? She glanced back at the mirror, but it had gone dark. The glass now reflected nothing, not her, not the room, just a gray shimmer like mist trapped behind glass. She rose slowly, walked over, and touched the surface. Ice cold. Her reflection flickered faintly into being, but it didn't move with her. Its eyes stayed fixed. Its mouth, was it smiling again? She jerked her hand away. Something about this house was wrong in its bones. It didn't feel haunted in the way ghost stories described. It felt aware, alive, and watching. Clara needed answers. She scanned the room. There was a small writing desk in the corner, partially collapsed under the weight of old books and cracked picture frames. She brushed them aside and opened the top drawer. Inside, brittle paper, dried flower petals, and a key. The key was brass, ornate, and cold as if it had just been buried in snow. It had something carved in the handle, a small symbol she didn't recognize. A crescent shape? Or maybe an eye? She pocketed it, feeling its sharp ridges against her palm. Then she noticed something else in the drawer, a scrap of a torn letter. You were born of this place. The house remembers its own, but it does not forgive them. Her breath caught. Born? She heard a soft whisper behind her. Not words, just breath. When she turned, the rocking chair was swaying again. Alone. Or pretending to be. Clara stared at the chair, unmoving, as it rocked gently on the warped wooden floor. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm was hypnotic, like breathing, like waiting. I know you're here, she said quietly, the words tasting like frost. You don't have to hide. But no voice answered. No shape revealed itself. Only the chair, creaking slowly. Then, from downstairs, something shattered. Clara jolted. The sound rang through the house like a bell struck deep underwater, dull and echoing. She moved quickly to the bedroom door, hesitated,
then opened it just a crack. The hallway stretched out before her, unchanged, still, but it felt like the walls were breathing now, slowly expanding and contracting. She stepped into the corridor. The doors on either side remained shut. She kept her gaze forward, trying not to glance too long at any one portrait or crack in the wall. Everything felt slightly wrong, angled just off enough to make her dizzy. As she reached the top of the staircase, she paused. Down below, the parlor was dark, but not empty. She heard it. A rustling, soft and slow, like fingers dragging through the pages of a book, or hair being combed. Clara gripped the key in her pocket, took a breath, and began to descend. Each step was more reluctant than the last, the air thickening like syrup around her legs. By the time she reached the bottom, she was sweating despite the cold. She turned toward the sound. The parlor door stood ajar now. She hadn't left it that way. Inside, the green velvet chair faced the fireplace again, empty. But on the small table beside it, the cracked teacup had been moved. It now sat on a white lace napkin, and steam rose from it, fresh, warm. A second cup sat across from it, waiting. She stepped into the room. "Clara," said a voice softly behind her. She turned. No one. But the other chair was now empty.
The figure in the chair was still, as if carved from shadow and memory. A woman again, but not the one from the mirror. This one looked older, her face lined, her hands pale and thin with veins like fading ink. She wore a black shawl, lace draped across her shoulders like cobwebs. And though she faced the fire, Clara couldn't see her eyes. Just the profile of a mouth that seemed too tired to smile, too burdened to speak. "Sit," the woman said, her voice thin as parchment. "It's rude to keep the house waiting." Clara didn't move, her legs locked in place. I don't understand. What is this place?" The woman's head tilted slightly. "You do understand. You just forgot, like all the others." Clara swallowed, suddenly aware of how dry her throat was. The scent of lavender was strong here, too strong. It reminded her of her grandmother's cedar chest, of funerals. She forced herself forward and lowered into the empty chair. The steam rising from the teacup curled in slow, elegant tendrils. "You were called here because the house is shifting again. It doesn't forget its blood." Clara's fingers tightened around the porcelain cup. "Blood? You carry it in your bones. You belong to it." "No," Clara said, but her voice was barely a whisper now. The woman turned her face toward her. Her eyes were sewn shut. Thread black as oil crossed each eyelid in crooked stitches. "You see with your eyes, but you'll feel with hers." Clara stood, heart slamming in her chest. "What do you want from me?" The woman didn't answer. Her body began to unravel, literally. Threads of her shawl came loose, lifting in the air like smoke, her body collapsing inward like fabric folding onto itself. And in the space where she'd sat, a small, broken music box. It began to play. The melody was warped, metallic, dragging through notes like footsteps on wet stone. Clara stepped back. The fireplace behind the chair flared without fuel. And from the shadows above it, something began to crawl out. It came slowly, as if unfolding from the smoke itself, one thin limb after another, each joint bending the wrong way, scraping against the brick of the hearth. It had no face, just the smooth suggestion of one, like a wax sculpture left too long in the sun. Where eyes should be, there were hollows. Where a mouth should be, only a tight twitching line that pulsed like it might open if she got too close. Clara couldn't move, her hands clenched at her sides, the teacup shattered on the rug below, forgotten. The creature, or memory, or dream, crawled fully from the fireplace and stood to its full height, taller than the doorway. Its limbs were far too long, fingertips brushing the floor. The same thing she'd seen in the mirror, only now she could hear it, its chest expanding and contracting with uneven, wheezing breaths as if it had only recently remembered how. The music box kept playing behind her. It turned its head toward her. Clara finally found her voice, shaking and low. "What are you?" The figure tilted unnaturally far to the side, its spine cracking audibly. It did not speak. Instead, it raised one of those long-fingered hands and pointed, not at her, at the wall. Clara turned. There, above the mantel, the portrait of the pale woman still hung, but now her eyes were open, and she was looking directly at Clara. "The house remembers," a voice whispered, but it didn't come from the creature. It came from inside Clara's own skull, threaded like thought. The blood must return. The creature took one slow, scraping step forward. Clara ran. She didn't think, didn't look back, just burst out of the parlor, through the dark hallway, and into the entryway where light from the outside should have been pouring in. But the windows were black. The door, gone. Not closed, gone. The wall where it had once been was now solid, rotted wood. The house had sealed itself, and Clara was inside.
Clara pressed her hands against the wall where the door had been, half expecting the wood to give way, to reveal the frame behind some illusion. But it was solid, cold, real. Her nails scraped at it until splinters pricked her skin. "No, no, no, no!" Her voice cracked under the weight of panic. She turned, back against the wall, eyes darting around the entryway. The chandelier above her swayed gently, though no air moved. Its glass pendants clinked like tiny bones, a soft, mocking chime. The house was breathing again. She could feel it. With every passing moment, the walls seemed to expand and contract. The floor dipped slightly, then steadied. The air had a pulse, and it matched hers only when her panic slowed, like the house was adjusting to her rhythm. She forced herself to breathe, to think. The key. It was still in her pocket. Her fingers found it quickly, its cold edges a comfort. A door. There had to be another door, another room, another exit. She moved quickly through the hallway, back past the parlor, past the study with the silent clock and the overturned photograph. She took a turn she hadn't noticed before, down a narrower corridor, barely wide enough to walk through without brushing the walls. This hall was different, older. The wallpaper here was rotted entirely away, exposing wood blackened with mold or something worse. At the end of the hall stood a small iron door. Basement. It looked like it belonged on a submarine. Rounded edges, rivets along the sides, a heavy latch. There was a keyhole. She paused. Every instinct screamed to stay away, but instincts hadn't gotten her out. And something told me this key, the one that pulsed like ice in her palm, was made for this door. She slipped it into the lock. It turned easily. The door groaned open. A wave of cold air met her, thick and sour like something had died deep below and never been buried. Stone steps spiraled into darkness. And just before she descended, she heard a soft whisper from behind her.
Don't go down there alone. She spun around. The hallway behind her was empty. The whisper still clung to the air, like fog in the lungs. It hadn't been her imagination. It had pressed into her ear too clearly, warm and breathy, as if someone had leaned in from just behind her shoulder. But no one was there. Just the house. Still. Waiting. She turned back toward the basement. The stairwell yawned below her like a throat carved from stone. The walls were slick with dampness. Somewhere far beneath, she thought she heard water, dripping slowly, rhythmically. Or footsteps. She gripped the edge of the iron door and placed one foot on the top step. Her flashlight was still in her bag. She fumbled for it, hands shaking slightly. When she clicked it on, the beam flickered twice, then steadied, narrow and yellow, like weak sunlight through murky water. She descended slowly. The door closed behind her. Not slammed, not gently, just firmly. Final. With each step, the temperature dropped. Her breath began to fog in front of her. The scent grew stronger, earth and mildew and copper. She wrapped her arms around herself, the flashlight's beam shaking slightly as she reached the bottom. The cellar opened into a low, wide room carved from stone. The walls arched like ribs. The ground was dirt, soft and uneven. Rusted metal shelves lined one side of the chamber, each filled with glass jars. Clara stepped closer. Each jar held something different. Hair, teeth, buttons, a doll's eye. She looked away, bile rising in her throat. At the far end of the chamber stood a door, not wood, but carved into the stone itself. It bore the same symbol as the key, the crescent or the eye. The surface pulsed faintly. She approached, slowly. The air here was still, thick like the bottom of a lake. When she reached out to touch the stone, it felt alive beneath her palm, soft, like skin stretched over bone. It opened on its own, and beyond it was a room filled with mirrors, dozens, all of them reflecting something that wasn't quite her.
The room was circular, its walls lined entirely with old, tarnished mirrors, tall ones, hand mirrors, shards embedded in the stone. Each one flickered with candlelight, though Clara saw no flame. The light seemed to come from within the glass itself, like each mirror remembered the glow of a fire long extinguished. She stepped forward, the dirt floor muffling her footsteps. Her own reflection multiplied in dozens of directions, but none of them moved quite like her. A hand lingered a second too long in the air. A head turned more slowly than it should have. One version of her blinked when she didn't. Clara's skin crawled. "This isn't real," she whispered to herself, but the words sounded hollow, borrowed. The mirrors whispered back, not with sound, but with movement, 100 versions of herself twisting ever so slightly. Some recoiled, others stared with hungry eyes. One smiled wide, too wide, lips stretching far past where they should. She stumbled backward, bumping into something cold and solid. A mirror. But this wasn't tarnished. This one was clean, and in it, she didn't see herself at all. She saw a child, a girl no older than 10, sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, pale blonde hair covering her face. She rocked gently, arms wrapped around her knees. She was humming something, soft and off-key. Clara touched the glass. "Hello?" The girl stopped rocking. Slowly, her head turned towards Clara. Her face was wrong. Her eyes were black, not shadowed, not empty, but filled with something ancient and moving. Her mouth was stitched shut with the same black thread as the woman upstairs. Clara gasped.
The glass rippled beneath her fingers like water. The girl stood, then lunged forward. Clara screamed and fell backward, hitting the ground hard, flashlight skidding across the floor and casting wild beams of light around the room. When she looked again, the mirror was just a mirror, but her reflection was gone. Clara sat frozen, heart hammering in her chest. The mirror before her reflected only the room, the flickering candlelight, the stone walls, the motionless dirt beneath her, but not her, not a trace of her, like she no longer existed in this space, like the house had taken her image and decided not to give it back. "No," she whispered, crawling toward the flashlight. Its beam flared across the mirrors, sending fractured gold light into every corner. Her own reflection flickered back to life in some of them, but not all. Some mirrors still showed the child. Some showed the woman in black. Some showed nothing at all. Clara rose to her feet, her knees coated in grit. She felt the weight of unseen eyes press against her skin, a cold heat sliding down her spine. "You don't belong here," came a voice, high and young, but echoing like it had been spoken through a tunnel of centuries. Clara turned, scanning the mirrors. The voice came again, this time deeper. "You left. The house never forgets." "Who are you?" Clara demanded, her voice breaking. In one of the mirrors, a figure stepped forward. A man this time, tall, thin, with empty sockets where his eyes should be. He wore an old-fashioned suit, stained dark at the cuffs, as if dipped in ink or blood. His mouth moved, but the voice came from everywhere. "You were the last born in these walls." Clara staggered backward. "No, I was never here. I was raised miles away. My grandmother, she never." "She took you, stole you away from the house before it could finish, before you were claimed." The mirrors all pulsed with dim light, every version of Clara flickering wildly, some crying, some screaming, some reaching out as if they could escape. The house waited. It fed on silence. Now you've returned. "Why?" Clara whispered. "To finish what was started." A gust of air swirled through the room, scattering dust and whispers. The mirror directly in front of Clara shattered outward, not inward, from within. Something was coming through. Clara threw her arms up as shards of mirror glass exploded outward, slicing through the air. Some pieces struck her coat, one grazed her cheek. She felt the sting but barely registered the pain. Her eyes were locked on the void beyond the broken mirror. Not darkness, not even reflection. It was a passage, a narrow corridor of black stone, its ceiling low, its walls too tight. Mist spilled from the shattered frame like breath from a hidden lung, and from within, a faint blue light pulsed like a heartbeat. Clara stepped back. "No!" The house groaned in response. The remaining mirrors began to hum, low and discordant, each at a different pitch, like 100 out-of-tune instruments vibrating with rage. Behind her, the door she'd come through slammed shut. She was trapped. Whatever this place was, the house was guiding her now. She grabbed the flashlight, its beam jittery but still functional, and stepped over the broken glass. Her boots crunched softly on the shards. She leaned toward the opening. Cold air washed over her skin, tingling with something more than temperature, something watching. Clara ducked and slipped inside. The corridor narrowed almost immediately. Her shoulders brushed the walls. The floor sloped downward at a gentle but persistent angle, dragging her deeper with each step. Then she heard it again. Footsteps behind her. Soft, slow, deliberate.
She turned, flashing the light backward. Nothing, just the glint of broken glass behind her, growing smaller. She turned forward again and froze. The corridor had opened into a new room, round, windowless, its ceiling domed like a church, painted with flaking murals, scenes of fire, water, childbirth, and burial. The air smelled like wet stone and metal. In the center of the room stood a wooden cradle, rocking slowly. No sound, just the gentle squeak of old wood shifting back and forth. Clara's hands shook. The cradle was empty, but the rocking didn't stop. Clara approached the cradle slowly, her breath shallow. The rocking was gentle, deliberate, like a mother's hand guided it, but no one else was there. She knelt beside it, placing one trembling hand on the cradle's edge to steady it. It stopped instantly. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was poised, expectant. Inside the cradle lay a bundle of yellowed cloth, folded tightly as if to swaddle something that was no longer there, or had never been, or had already left. She reached out, hesitating. Something inside her screamed not to touch it, but her fingers moved anyway, peeling back the top layer of fabric. Beneath it, only a single object. A ribbon, deep red, almost black, slick with something that wasn't quite dry. Her grandmother used to wear ribbons like this. Clara remembered seeing one on the dresser back when she was a child. She had reached for it once, and her grandmother had snatched it away so quickly her knuckles turned white. "Not that one," she'd said. "Never that one." She stared at it now, her hand hovering over it. The ribbon twitched, not from the breeze, not from gravity. It twitched like a sleeping thing disturbed. Clara recoiled, nearly tipping the cradle. Behind her, something breathed. She turned sharply, heart pounding. The mural on the domed ceiling had changed. Where once there were abstract figures, painted women birthing stars, shadowed men sinking into soil, now there were faces, recognizable ones. Her mother, her grandmother, her own. Painted in rich detail, their mouths open in identical silent screams. Clara backed toward the cradle again, disoriented. The mural figures began to move, shifting slowly in the peeling paint, eyes rolling, mouths closing, then opening again, like they were waking from centuries of sleep. And from the cradle came a sound, a laugh, high-pitched, a child's, only it didn't sound quite right. Too slow, too knowing.
The laugh echoed far too long for such a small space, stretching unnaturally until it no longer sounded like a child at all. It curled around Clara's ears and slid down her spine like cold water. She stepped away from the cradle, her flashlight beam shaking across the painted ceiling where the screaming faces continued to shift, blink, twist. Her own painted eyes followed her now. That was impossible. She turned and ran, back through the narrow corridor, past the shattered mirror frame, and into the mirror room again. But it was no longer empty. Now, someone stood in each mirror. Not reflections, not mimics, people. All versions of Clara. One stood weeping, hands clawing at her own face. Another crouched in a corner whispering to herself over and over, "It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault." A third, closer, stood completely still, staring at Clara with something far worse than hatred. Recognition. That version of Clara smiled, slowly, then lifted a hand and pressed it to the inside of the glass. Clara's breath hitched. A handprint bloomed on her side of the mirror, cold and wet. She stumbled backward, and slammed into something solid. A voice, calm and low, spoke directly behind her. "You weren't supposed to come back." Clara whirled around. A man stood there, in the flickering half-light, middle-aged, tall, with sunken eyes and a crooked nose. He wore an old caretaker's uniform, the patch on his shoulder faded beyond legibility. Clara backed away. Who are you?" He didn't move, just watched her with an exhausted sort of sadness. "I used to lock the doors, make sure no one wandered too deep, but the house, it opens for those it remembers." "You've seen it too. The mirrors, the thing in the fireplace, the baby?" He flinched at that word. "There was never a baby, only promises." The mirrors behind him began to hum again. The Clara and the nearest one started banging on the inside of the glass. "Get out," the caretaker said, voice low and urgent. "Get out before it chooses you again." Clara whispered, "I can't. The door, it's gone." He closed his eyes. "It's already started." The caretaker turned from her, facing the mirrors now, his back tense, shoulders hunched, like a man too used to bearing things alone. "It always starts the same," he murmured. "It lures them back, the blood, the forgotten, the broken branches, and once they cross the threshold," he trailed off, shaking his head, "the house begins to shift." Clara stood rigid, the word "again" from earlier still echoing in her mind. "How do I leave?" she asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked over his shoulder. "And you were born in this house, weren't you?" She hesitated. "No, I was raised in, but not born," he said, finishing for her. "That's how it hides, how it keeps you unknowing. There's a line in the stone that never broke. You belong to this place more than you belong to the world outside, and now it's calling itself back through you." Clara took a step back. "You're not making sense." He turned to face her fully now, and for the first time she saw what was wrong with him. He didn't cast a reflection in any of the mirrors. "You'll see it soon. The house is a mouth, and we were just its teeth, used and discarded until the next bite." The mirrors began to tremble. A long, low sound rose from the walls. Not wind, not voice. It was as though the structure of the place was moaning. The caretaker stepped quickly toward her, grabbing her wrist. "Do you still have the key?" She nodded, startled. "Good," he whispered. "There's one more door, but you won't find it with your eyes." Clara's voice was barely audible. "Then how?" "With what it took from you." And then behind them, all the mirrors shattered at once.
The explosion of glass was deafening. Shards burst outward like a scream given shape, slicing through the air and stinging Clara's arms and face. She dropped to the floor, arms shielding her head, ears ringing with the collapse of 100 lives all breaking at once. When the sound finally faded, silence did not return. Something was coming. She heard it, slow, dragging footsteps across the broken glass, sharp, wet breaths, a rhythmic tick, 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 like claws tapping along the walls. She looked up. The caretaker was gone. Not fled, gone. No trace, no blood, no sound, just vanished. In his place, a figure now stood at the far end of the mirror room, the same faceless creature from the hearth. The long limbs, the fluid, unnatural movements. It stepped carefully through the shards, as if savoring the moment. Clara scrambled backward, heart racing, blood running warm from her temple. She reached for the key in her coat pocket and clenched it in her fist. "There's a door," she whispered. "There has to be." The creature moved closer. Its body twitched as though it were deciding what shape to become, as though it were remembering how to be. And then Clara understood what the caretaker had meant. It had taken something from her, not just her reflection, her memory.
Something she had once known, once lived. She closed her eyes, squeezing the key so tightly it bit into her skin. "Show me. Whatever you took, show me." The key pulsed. And then, she was not in the mirror room anymore. She was small, cold, lying on her side on old wooden floorboards. A voice above her was singing something low and ancient, a lullaby with no words. A woman's voice, familiar. There was light coming from a fireplace. And the house wasn't scary, not yet. It was alive, yes, but soft, humming gently, breathing with her. She saw a door, a small one beneath the stairs, not a room, not even an exit, a choice. The memory snapped like a string pulled tight. She was back in the mirror room, alone, but now she knew. She turned and ran toward the staircase. Clara didn't look back. The sound of the thing chasing her echoed through the hallway. Sharp scrapes, wet smacks of limbs hitting walls too narrow for its frame. But it didn't rush. It moved like it knew there was no need, like it had waited this long and could wait a little longer. She sprinted through the corridor, the flickering flashlight swinging wildly in her hand, splashing light over the crumbling wallpaper, the warped wood of the staircase looming ahead. She rounded the corner, nearly slipping on loose dust, and dropped to her knees before the stairs. There it was, just as the memory had shown her. A door, no taller than a crawlspace hatch, tucked beneath the stairs, painted over, long forgotten, edges nearly invisible. Her fingers found the seam. She scraped the paint with her nails, finding the shape, the groove of a keyhole. The key. She pulled it from her coat and slipped it in. It turned with a soft, welcoming click. Behind her, the creature growled, no longer distant, close. She threw the small door open. Inside, blackness. Not absence of light, but something deeper. A stillness so complete it felt like a breath not yet exhaled. But the darkness beckoned. She turned her head just once. The creature stood at the edge of the hallway now, watching. Its head cocked like a predator studying prey that had done something unexpected. Clara crawled inside. The door shut behind her. Not slammed, not latched. Just closed, firm and final. Inside the crawlspace, the silence was complete. Her flashlight flickered, then died. But there was no panic. The air was warmer here, softer, as if this part of the house remembered her. She moved forward on her hands and knees, the wooden boards cool against her palms, the low ceiling pressing close above. Then ahead, a faint glow, gold, like candlelight. She crawled toward it and emerged into a small circular chamber, almost womb-like in shape, with curved walls and a domed ceiling. In the center sat a small wooden chair and a writing desk. Upon it, a journal. Her name was carved on the cover. Not Clara, not Miss Vale, just you.
Clara stared at the word carved into the journal's cover. You. And for a moment, she couldn't move. It was too familiar, too personal. The kind of word someone uses when they already know who you'll become. She sat slowly in the chair, her body aching from the cold and the crawling, her palms still smarting from the mirror shards. The candlelight, though she saw no flame, glowed from nowhere, bathing the room in a quiet amber hue. She opened the journal. The first page was blank, the second too. She flipped carefully, pages turning like brittle leaves. Then, midway through the book, words began. You came back. You always do. This time, maybe you'll stay long enough to remember. Her throat tightened. She turned the page. The house isn't haunted, it's hollow. It fills itself with echoes, with longing, with the ones who forgot. The next page held a drawing, simple, almost childlike, a woman holding a child. The woman's face had been scribbled over with red ink, but the child wore a small red ribbon in her hair. Clara touched it without thinking, and suddenly, she wasn't in the room anymore. She was outside the house, a toddler, barefoot, sitting in the grass. The marsh behind her shimmered in the heat of late summer. Dragonflies darted above cattails. Wind rustled gently. Laughter rang through the air, not hers, but a woman's. "You always find the places you're not meant to go," the voice said. Clara turned in the memory. The woman, her mother, her grandmother, stood nearby in a long black dress, eyes bright, lips curled in a private smile. "Let the house sleep, Clara. It's not ready for you yet." The child, she, didn't answer. She only stared at the house. Even then, it had called to her. The memory shattered like glass underfoot. She gasped, returned to the chamber beneath the stairs, journal still open in her lap, and across from her now stood the caretaker. Only his eyes were stitched shut, like the others, like hers had been in the mirror. He opened his mouth and began to scream. The scream was a sound born from places no lungs should reach. It wasn't loud in volume, it was deep, vibrating through the floor, up the walls, into Clara's chest. Her ribs rattled, her teeth ached. The candlelight flickered violently and then dimmed to embers as the sound grew sharper, more defined. It was no longer just a scream. It was a word, a command. Remember. Clara slammed the journal shut and stood, backing against the curve of the chamber's wall. The caretaker's stitched eyes bled slowly now, weeping dark tears down his gaunt cheeks. His arms hung at his sides, trembling. She pressed her hands to her ears. "I don't remember." The scream cut off. Silence rushed in like water breaking through a dam. Then, the softest whisper, "Not yet." The caretaker collapsed, not fell, collapsed, like a puppet whose strings had been sliced. His body folded in on itself, leaving behind only the faint scent of ash and one single thread of black silk coiled on the floor. Clara stared at it, heart pounding. She was shaking now, more from knowing than fear, because something inside her had shifted. The house hadn't just shown her memories, it had hidden them, and now it was pulling them back, piece by piece. She knelt, picked up the thread, and wrapped it gently around her finger. The moment she touched it, a spark lit behind her eyes. Another memory surfaced. She was older this time, maybe 8, wandering the halls of the house alone at night, barefoot and cold, holding a candle. The flame flickered in time with her breath. She reached a door she didn't remember opening, and inside was the woman, sitting in a rocking chair, same black shawl, same long white fingers, only this time the woman looked directly at her and said, "You were never meant to leave." Clara snapped out of it, her breath ragged. The chamber was spinning now. The walls pulsed like lungs, inhaling her fear. The journal flipped open again on its own. The ink on the final page bled into a single sentence. "The house is inside you now."
Clara stared at the final sentence.
the ink still glistening as if freshly spilled. The house is inside you now. She couldn't look away. The words seemed to breathe, pulsing gently on the page like a wound that would never close. The more she stared, the more the letters swam, shifting, reforming. The candlelight dimmed. Then the sentence changed. She's waiting upstairs. A gust of cold air passed through the chamber, extinguishing the invisible flame. The glow vanished. The journal snapped shut. Clara stood. She didn't want to go back upstairs. Every instinct told her that if she returned to the upper floor, the hallway of 7 doors, the room with the rocking chair, she might not come back down. But the house was no longer waiting for permission. Boards groaned above her. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. She could hear it now. Footsteps, heavy, measured, pacing the upstairs hallway like someone rehearsing a scene, waiting for their cue. Clara retraced her path through the crawl space, the walls pressing in closer this time. It felt narrower, heavier, and warmer, as though the house had grown aware of her passage. She emerged beneath the staircase once more, heart hammering. The front door still wasn't there. Only the staircase remained, and the fog curling thickly along the walls like fingers reaching from hidden places. Clara climbed. Each step creaked beneath her weight, no longer simply old, but resentful. At the top, the hallway stretched long and quiet. All 7 doors closed this time, except the last. The 7th door was open now, wide open. Light spilled out. Not the pale glow of fog-choked windows, but firelight. Orange, flickering, alive. Clara's legs moved on their own, her breath shallow, her hands clenched at her sides. As she reached the final door, a voice floated out, soft, melodic, almost maternal. A lullaby. The same tune from the music box, only now it was being sung.
Clara hesitated at the threshold. The voice was faint, lilting, not quite human, too slow, too precise. Each note wavered as if sung through a veil, like someone remembering how to sing after centuries of silence. And though she couldn't place the language, the melody stirred something in her. She had heard it before, not in this life, but somewhere deeper. The room beyond the door had changed. No longer the cracked, dusty space she remembered. Now it pulsed with warmth and flickering amber light. The fireplace burned high, casting long shadows that danced along the walls like figures in ritual. Heavy curtains billowed gently, despite the windows being closed. The green velvet chair sat in the corner again, but it was no longer empty. The woman was there, and this time she was facing her. She wore the same black shawl, her hair long and loose like riverweed draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were open, but they were wrong. They weren't sewn shut like before. Now they were wide, glassy, and dark, like 2 pits in deep soil, and they didn't blink. "Clara," she said softly. Clara flinched. The name struck with weight, like a bell tolling through a thick forest. Clara's voice trembled. I know you." The woman smiled, slow and deep, like she'd been waiting forever to be recognized.
You always do, eventually. Clara stepped into the room. Are you my grandmother? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she lifted one pale hand and pointed to the mirror on the far wall. Clara turned. The mirror was no longer warped. It was clear, and in it she saw not herself, but herself as a child, sitting on the floor, wearing the red ribbon, looking up at the fireplace, waiting. I used to come here, Clara whispered. Yes, the woman said, before they took you, before they made you forget. But the house kept your reflection. It kept your shape. And now you've returned. To finish it? Clara asked, voice barely audible. The woman nodded. To wake it. Then she extended her hand. Come sit, just once more.
Clara hesitated, her feet rooted to the threshold. The pull of the woman's voice was gentle, yes, but deep beneath it pulsed something far older, a hunger not for flesh, but for memory, for return. The rocking chair creaked as the woman patted the space beside her. There was room somehow, despite the narrowness of the seat. The fire crackled behind them, its light rising higher now, stretching shadows across the ceiling that slithered like vines. I don't understand, Clara said, even though part of her did. The woman's voice was calm. You were meant to be the last, to stay, to complete what began when the first stone was laid. But they took you from us, buried you in a world of noise. Now the house stirs again because you remembered. Clara shook her head. This place, it's not real. It's more real than the life they gave you. That life was borrowed. This one you were built for. The mirror behind them shimmered again. This time, Clara saw her adult self standing behind the child version, one hand resting protectively on her own tiny shoulder. The child looked up, confused. The woman, older Clara, was weeping. What is this? She whispered. Why do I remember this now? Because the last thread has been pulled. The door is open. All you must do is sit. Clara took a shaky step forward. The floor beneath her didn't creak. It sighed. The house was breathing again. She looked once more into the mirror. The child version of herself turned and met her gaze, and smiled. Not innocent, knowing. You're not me, Clara whispered. The child stood in the mirror. No, the child Clara replied, voice distorted, doubled. I'm what the house kept when it lost you. The image flickered, and then the mirror cracked. Hairline fractures ran through the glass like veins. The child's eyes glowed dimly. The fire surged behind her, casting the woman in the chair in silhouette. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was waiting. Clara clenched the key in her coat pocket. Its edges felt sharper now, warm where it had once been cold, pulsing with something alive. It no longer felt like a tool. It felt like a piece of her, or maybe a piece the house had left in her, waiting for the right moment. This moment. The woman in the chair said nothing now. Her eyes had not moved. Her hands rested neatly on her lap, one pale thumb tracing the edge of the other in small, ceaseless circles. The fire behind her roared higher, brighter, casting gold over the entire room, gold that began to shift, to turn red. Clara looked to the mirror. The cracks had widened, forming a web of splinters.
Her child self still stood within it, unmoving, still smiling, but the smile had grown, too wide, too full of teeth that weren't hers, or hadn't been. "I'm not staying," Clara whispered, more to herself than anyone. The woman finally spoke. "You already have." And suddenly, every sound vanished. No fire, no breathing, no shifting. The house held its breath. Then the mirror shattered completely, falling inward into a darkness that wasn't a reflection at all, but a hollowed-out space filled with something. A hand reached out from the empty frame, small, familiar. The child version of Clara pulled herself through, feet bare, ribbon fluttering behind her like a flag of surrender. She stepped onto the floor with unnatural grace, standing upright as if she'd never belonged behind the glass at all. Clara stumbled back. "What are you?" The child tilted her head. "I'm what was left when you ran. I kept the house company." "You're not me." "I was." The firelight dimmed, flickering low as the child stepped forward. "Now it wants you whole again." The woman in the chair turned to look directly at Clara. Her face changed as she moved. Lines smoothed, skin grew paler, eyes turned darker. She was no longer an old woman. She was becoming Clara, bit by bit. Mouth, eyes, hands. Clara gasped. The house wasn't keeping memories. It was replacing her.
Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the woman in the chair, at herself. The transformation was subtle but relentless, like watching wax melt into a familiar mold. Her features, her posture, the slight furrow of her brow perfectly mirrored. It wasn't mimicry, it was claiming. "No," Clara whispered, "you can't." But the woman, her reflection, rose slowly from the chair, the shawl falling from her shoulders in a slither of black lace. Her eyes met Clara's. They were hollow, infinite, but behind them shimmered a memory Clara had never lived, yet recognized. The child, her other self, stood beside the doppelganger now, holding her hand like a daughter reunited with her mother. They were both her, and neither. "You ran once. They tore you away from us, but now you've come back." I didn't know what this place was." The other Clara stepped forward, bare feet soundless on the wood. "But you always felt it, that ache, that gap. You thought it was grief, thought it was distance, but it was us calling." Clara backed toward the door, but it had vanished again. Only wall remained. "You don't belong out there anymore. You never did." Clara's hand clenched the key in her pocket, still warm, still pulsing. "What if I don't choose either of you?" she asked. The mirror remnants on the floor began to tremble, shards skittering across the boards as if caught in an invisible wind. "You already chose," the woman whispered, "the moment you remembered." "No," Clara said louder now. "The house remembers, but I decide." She pulled the key free and held it high. The firelight dimmed again, flickering low, and a sound echoed through the room, a door unlocking. Behind the fireplace, a crack formed in the stone, vertical, thin, growing wider. The house groaned in protest. The child hissed, "You'll never be whole without us." Clara turned, ran to the wall, and thrust the key into the stone. It turned with a shudder. The crack split wide, revealing blackness, and a staircase spiraling down. The stone split wider, groaning as if the house itself were being wounded. Clara pressed through the opening, heart racing, the sharp scent of soot and cold earth
clinging to the air like mold in a sealed room. Behind her, the voices rose, two in unison now. "Clara, come back! You're breaking the pattern!" She didn't stop. She stepped onto the staircase, carved directly into the stone, spiraling downward into a well of thick darkness. The warmth of the upstairs room vanished almost instantly. The deeper she went, the colder the air became, like she was descending through layers of the house's memory. The door above her slammed shut. Total blackness. Clara kept moving, one hand pressed to the cold, wet wall for balance. Her boots slipped on the smooth steps. The air smelled ancient, untouched, like earth sealed since the beginning of time. Then, faintly, she saw it. A glow. Dull red. Not fire, but something deeper, rooted. She descended toward it. The staircase opened into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling arched above her like the inside of a cathedral, its stone ribbed and sweating. And in the center of the room, a heart. Massive. Beating. It wasn't flesh. Not exactly. It was shaped like a heart, but formed of black stone. Veins of red light pulsing through its surface with every slow, thunderous beat. Tubes, tendrils, and roots stretched from it into the surrounding walls, snaking like arteries, feeding the entire structure above. The house, it wasn't just alive, it was centered. This was its core. It was alive. Clara stepped forward, unable to look away. Memories flooded her with every beat. The moment she was born beneath this very chamber. A woman handing her to another, whispering, "Hide her before it marks her." Being carried through corridors she now barely remembered. The first time she forgot. And now this, the child version of her, had never left. But this part, the buried part, had waited. And now it reached for her. Tendrils slithered from the heart, not fast, welcoming, ready to make her whole.
Clara stood frozen at the edge of the pulsing chamber, her skin tingling with every thud of the great stone heart. Each beat seemed to echo inside her, as though it were tuning her own blood to its rhythm. The tendrils unfurled across the floor like roots seeking water, weaving between cracks in the stone. They didn't lunge, didn't attack. They waited, welcoming, inviting, like old hands stretching from a grave, not to harm, but to cradle. Clara took one step back. The heart shuddered. The chamber quaked, dusk falling in fine sheets from the vaulted ceiling. From above, she heard the distant groan of the house's bones, the walls, the foundation, the very timbers of the place shifting in response. It knew where she was now, and it didn't want to let her leave again. "No," she whispered. "I'm not yours, not anymore." She drew the key from her coat once more. It pulsed brightly now, red lines glowing across its surface, in time with the heart's rhythm, but just slightly out of sync, disruptive. She looked down at it, then at the heart. Was it a weapon? She didn't know, but it was something the house hadn't expected her to keep. Clara moved closer to the heart, the tendrils retracting slightly, almost in hesitation. The surface of the heart was rough stone, but it gleamed with the sheen of something slick beneath. As she approached, she felt warmth, intoxicating, almost maternal. It called to her in a voice that was not a voice at all, but memory. "Clara, stay here. You were safe here. Clara, don't you miss being part of something? You don't have to carry the world alone anymore." She lifted the key.
The heart shivered. The house moaned again from above. A gust of air pushed through the chamber, wet, cold, earthy, almost like a last attempt at seduction. But she was no longer that child. She was her. Clara drove the key into the glowing vein at the heart's surface.
The instant the key pierced the glowing vein, the entire heart seized. The red light flared white hot, then cracked like glass. The stone screamed, a sound not made by any living creature, but by something far older and deeper. The chamber shook violently as though the house above were being torn from its very roots. Clara staggered back, shielding her eyes as a blast of heat radiated from the wound. The tendrils writhed in panic, no longer reaching for her but retreating, slithering away like snakes into the walls. A fracture split through the heart, top to bottom, glowing molten red at the seam. The chamber's walls began to buckle. Chunks of stone crashed from the ceiling, smashing into the floor, scattering dust and sparks. The house was dying. Clara turned to run, but behind her the spiral staircase was gone. Only a smooth stone wall remained. "No! No! No!" she shouted, pounding her fists against it. "Let me out!" The house didn't answer, but something else did. The heartbeat slowed, then stopped. Silence spread outward from the broken heart like a ripple in water. For a moment, Clara felt nothing. No cold, no sound. Just weightlessness. And then, a whisper. Not from the walls, from inside her. "If the house cannot keep you, it will become you." Pain lanced through her skull, white hot and blinding. She screamed, collapsing to her knees, clutching her head. Visions flooded her mind. Every room, every hallway, every name etched into wood and stone, every door ever opened. They were hers. She was no longer just in the house. She was the house. Its memory, its breath, its hunger. The key glowed brightly in her pocket again. And suddenly, choice. Two paths formed in her mind. Stay, become the keeper of the house, its next heartbeat, or sever it completely. Erase it from memory, even if it meant erasing herself. Her fingers hovered over the key once more. Whispers rose around her. Her grandmother's voice, her mother's, the child's, her own, all asking the same question. Which one will you be?
The chamber flickered between states, stone and smoke, ruin and rebirth, as if reality itself were unsure of which version to hold. Clara knelt beside the fractured heart, the key still glowing in her trembling hand. It was warm now, painfully so, but not from heat. It pulsed with decision, waiting for her will to shape it. All around her, the tendrils had gone still, curled in on themselves like dying roots. But the voice inside her mind had not stopped. It was quieter now, almost sad. You were meant to be the pulse, the blood, the memory keeper. You were never meant to leave. She thought of the mirrors, of the broken child with the red ribbon, of the woman in the rocking chair who had worn her face like a mask. She thought of her own hands now, cracked and bleeding, dust in her hair, mud on her skin. Alive. Not perfect, not whole, but free. "I am not your breath," she said softly, "and I am not your bones." The chamber seemed to lean in, as if the house was listening closely now, truly hearing her, for the first time. "I am what you tried to forget," Clara whispered. "The choice." With both hands, she grasped the key's handle, now fully fused with the glowing vein in the heart, and turned. Not toward the house, but away from it. The moment she did, the light within the key flared pure white, so bright it swallowed the chamber. The heart gave a final shudder and cracked fully apart, stone collapsing inward in a slow-motion implosion. Clara was thrown backward, weightless. Then, darkness. No sound, no time, only silence. Then, a breath. Her breath. Ragged. Alive. She gasped awake, coughing, choking on dust and cold air. She was lying on her back in the marsh outside. The house was gone. No mist, no wind, just the night sky above her, filled with unfamiliar stars. She sat up slowly. Mud clung to her hands. Her coat was soaked, her hair tangled, but she was out. Alone. The willow tree stood nearby, quiet and still, and in her pocket, the key, cool and cracked in two. Clara sat in the wet grass, staring at the broken halves of the key in her palm. They no longer pulsed, no longer glowed, just cold brass and jagged edges. But she didn't feel triumphant. She felt hollow, like the sound after thunder, like something had been silenced. The marsh was still, but not lifeless. Frogs croaked faintly from the reeds. A breeze stirred the willows. The scent of fog was gone, replaced by wet earth and distant blossoms. It was over. Wasn't it? She stood slowly, every joint aching, every breath heavy with memory. Her eyes scanned the horizon, half expecting to see the dark silhouette of the house waiting beyond the tree line. But there was nothing, just an open field where the house once stood. No foundation, no ruins, not even disturbed soil. It was as if the earth had closed around the memory, sealing it beneath centuries of indifference. She turned toward her car, which still sat at the edge of the gravel path. It looked untouched, though its windshield was fogged from the inside. She opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there in silence, gripping the wheel. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirror. She looked older, something about her eyes, heavier, deeper. She barely recognized herself. She touched the rearview mirror gently, and it rippled, only slightly, like a stone tossed into still water. She pulled her hand back quickly, heart racing. "No," she whispered. "You're gone." But were they? She reached into her coat pocket again. Alongside the broken key was something else now. A length of red ribbon, damp, wrinkled, just long enough to tie around a child's hair. She hadn't put it there. She let it fall to the passenger seat, her fingers trembling. Outside, the wind picked up, soft at first, then stronger, and in it, just barely carried through the grass and trees, came a distant voice, singing. A lullaby. The same one. Clara turned the key in the ignition with shaking hands. The engine started,
But the radio came on too. Not static, not music. A child's voice. You brought the house with you.
Clara stared at the radio. The dial hadn't moved. The display didn't show any station, just a flat, blinking line, like a heartbeat waiting to be resumed. The child's voice faded, replaced by the soft hum of silence. She reached out with a trembling hand and turned the volume knob all the way down, but the quiet that followed wasn't comforting. It was heavy, like something had just stepped into the room and hadn't said a word. She placed the broken key on the dashboard. The ribbon remained curled on the passenger seat, like it belonged there, like it always had. She didn't touch it. Couldn't. The engine idled softly. The outside world was still, but the inside of the car felt colder than it should have. She turned on the heater. Nothing happened. The vents exhaled air like the breath of the house. "No," she said firmly, pressing her back into the seat, eyes closed. "You're gone. I broke you." But had she? She remembered what the caretaker said, what had echoed from the walls beneath the house. If it can't keep you, it will become you. Clara opened her eyes. The stretch stretched out ahead, empty, gray, winding toward the world she'd left behind. She pressed her foot to the gas, and the car inched forward, gravel crunching under the tires. Her headlights cut through a thickening fog, not like before, not otherworldly, but natural. Morning mist, perhaps. That's what she told herself. She drove for miles, but the world outside didn't look the same. Familiar shapes were wrong. Trees leaned a little too far into the road. Houses sat too close together, roofs too sharp, windows too wide. The street signs had letters, but the words were unreadable, as though she'd forgotten the language of the place she came from. She checked her mirrors. Her reflection was there, but something in it was smiling when she wasn't. She drove faster, and the world grew darker. The road narrowed as Clara pressed on, flanked by crooked trees that arched overhead like ribs, forming a canopy that filtered the early morning light into dull, flickering patches. Her hands gripped the wheel too tightly. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Time passed, but her watch had stopped. The sky had turned a pale, featureless gray, neither dawn nor dusk. She passed a mailbox, rusted and crumpled, hanging from a post carved with strange notches. No house stood nearby, just an empty lot choked with vines. Then another, and another. Each mailbox marked a ghost, a life that had vanished or hadn't begun. The radio remained off, but once, as she rounded a bend, the speakers crackled, briefly. Not a voice, not static, just the sound of wood, rocking. She pulled over. The forest to her left had grown thick, too thick, knotted with brush that hadn't been there seconds ago. It pressed against the edge of the road, like a tide encroaching. Clara shut off the car. Silence. She stared into the trees and saw it. Far off, half hidden in fog and shade, a window, a single, narrow pane of glass, framed in rotting wood, lit by a pale amber glow from within. No wall, no house, just the window, suspended in the woods like a painting someone had hung in the wrong place. Behind the glass, movement, a shadow, a rocking chair. No figure this time, just the sound. Back and forth, back and forth. Clara stepped out of the car. The cold bit into her instantly, deeper than before. She wrapped her coat tighter, breath fogging as she stepped toward the trees. The sound of the rocking chair grew louder with each step, not in volume, but presence. It filled her ears, like her own thoughts had been pushed aside. She stood before the window and realized something terrifying. It was the same window, from the upstairs room, from her room, the one with the mirror, and the fire, and the choice. But the house was gone. Only the window remained, watching her, waiting.
Clara stared into the window, breath catching as condensation bloomed gently across the glass on the inside. The amber light within pulsed softly like candlelight, but there was no candle, just the rhythmic sway of the unseen rocking chair, back and forth, back and forth. The forest around her was silent, no birds, no wind, just the hush of a place holding its breath. She stepped closer. The window pane stood upright in the middle of the clearing, unattached to anything, yet perfectly steady. Its wooden frame was splintered and weeping sap. Thin strands of hair, gray and brittle, clung to the corners of the sill like cobwebs. She pressed her hand to the glass. It was warm. Inside, the room was clearer now. Same peeling wallpaper, same cracked floorboards. The fire burned in the hearth, unmoving, and there, by the mirror, stood a shadow. Not quite human, not quite reflection. It shifted with her, but slightly off, a fraction behind, like it had to remember what she did before it could do the same. "Why are you still here?" Clara whispered. The figure tilted its head, and though it had no face, she knew it was smiling. The window darkened, then cracked. Hairline fractures spread out from where her hand had touched. The glass splintered with a soft sigh, lines etching in slow motion like a web forming under ice. She backed away. "No, I destroyed you." A whisper followed her from the trees, not behind her, but beside her, as if spoken through her own ear. "You released it." She turned sharply. No one. Only the ribbon in her coat pocket, swaying gently as if stirred by breath. Her car was still behind her, still running, but the headlights were dim now, flickering. She looked once more at the window. The shadow was gone, but the rocking chair hadn't stopped. It never did. Clara backed away from the window, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Each step away from it felt heavier, like the soil itself resisted her departure. The pulsing warmth from the glass faded behind her, but not from her bones. It had left a residue, something she could feel humming in her chest. She turned to face the car again, and froze. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat, a silhouette, unmoving. Her shape, her size. At first she thought it might be her reflection in the windshield, but no. This version of her didn't move when she did, didn't flinch, just stared straight ahead, hands on the wheel, ribbon tied in her hair. She stood perfectly still at the tree line. The figure in the car turned its head, slowly, jerkily, and smiled. A soft tap-tap echoed from inside the car. The figure was knocking on the window from the inside. Clara stumbled backward. The woods around her were no longer empty. The trees had closed in tighter, their trunks impossibly close together, forming narrow hallways of bark and shadow. Somewhere behind her, the rocking stopped. Silence. And then, a voice. Her own voice. "You left the door open, Clara!" Her chest tightened. "No!" she said, spinning back toward the floating window, but it was gone. In its place, only a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement, like the memory of a doorway. The engine of her car roared suddenly, high and choking, like it was burning too hot. Smoke curled from the hood. She ran toward it, heart pounding. As she neared, the figure in the driver's seat faded, not like mist, not like a ghost, but like it had slipped out of something, out of a reflection, out of her. She reached the door. It was locked from the inside. She pounded on the glass. Her own face stared back, distorted, but the keys were in the ignition. The car was running, so who had locked it? Behind her, the woods whispered, "We never needed walls to hold you."
Clara stepped back from the car, her hands trembling. The figure was gone, but the keys were still in the ignition. The engine idled with a low, growling rhythm, like it was waiting, not to go forward, but to consume something. She looked down at the driver's side mirror. It no longer reflected the car. It reflected the upstairs hallway. Flickering gaslight. 7 doors. All shut. Except the last. The 7th door was open again. "Stop it!" Clara hissed. "You're gone! I ended you!" But the mirror didn't change. She bent low and tried to force the door open. It wouldn't budge. It was sealed, even though the window was cracked open just enough to hear the radio whispering again. "We let you go. You brought us back. You woke us up, and now we live in the cracks." Clara covered her ears, eyes squeezed shut. "You're not real. Your memory, that's all." But wasn't that enough? The house hadn't needed to survive in brick and beam. It had lived in her bones, in the missing months, in the nightmares she never remembered. She stumbled back into the road, headlights blinding her for a moment. When her vision cleared, there was another car approaching. An old truck, rust-eaten, familiar. It rolled to a stop beside her. The window cranked down, slow and deliberate, revealing a woman in her 60s, a face worn like river stone, pale blue eyes. Clara gasped. "Gran?" The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just sorrow. "I told them not to bring you back," she said. "Told them you were better off forgotten." Clara stepped closer. "What is this? What are you?" Her grandmother's eyes clouded. "I'm what's left of her, the part that stayed behind to keep it asleep. And I woke it. You are it." The woman reached out and placed something in Clara's hand. Another ribbon, black this time, slick with dew. "Choose before it chooses for you." The ribbon in Clara's hand was heavy despite its delicate appearance, soaked with something darker than water. It coiled slightly in her palm, warm to the touch, as though it recognized her. She stared at it, her breath shallow. "I already chose. I destroyed the heart." Her grandmother, or the thing wearing her grandmother's face, shook her head slowly. "No, child. You chose to end the house, but not yourself, not what it left in you." Clara took a step back. "I'm not part of it anymore." The woman leaned out of the truck window, and now her voice sounded like wind through rotted beams. "Then why are you still hearing it?"
The forest fell silent again. No birds, no insects, only the creak of a rocking chair somewhere behind the trees. Clara turned in a slow circle. There was no house, no window, but the sound remained. Back and forth, back and forth. She clenched the ribbon. "What happens if I wear this?" she asked. The woman in the truck didn't smile. "You stay. And if I don't?" The woman's eyes gleamed with some unreadable emotion. Fear, perhaps, or regret. "You'll carry the house with you, everywhere, in mirrors, in doorways, in dreams. And one day, when someone opens the wrong one..." Clara swallowed. "It comes back." The woman nodded. "It always does." Behind her, the car engine sputtered and coughed, once, twice, then went still, dead. The lights faded. The truck's engine was silent too now. The wind had picked up, cold and sudden, and from behind the trees a second voice spoke, young, clear, her own. "You don't have to be afraid. Just come home." Clara looked down at the black ribbon, then at her hand. She was holding two. The red one was back, wrapped around her fingers like it had grown there. Both options. Stay or carry. She was no longer choosing for herself. She was choosing for the world.
Clara's fingers tightened around the two ribbons, one red, one black. They pulsed faintly in her palms, warm and wet like fresh blood, but neither left a stain. It was as if the house didn't just mark objects. It marked decisions. "Two ribbons," she said aloud, her voice cracking in the cold. "Two doors. Two versions of me." Her grandmother's reflection in the truck had vanished. The seat was empty. The truck itself began to fade, not like smoke, but like memory, unspooling at the edges until only the faintest shimmer of metal remained in the air. Behind her, the forest breathed in unison. The sound was subtle, barely more than the wind, but it was unmistakably alive, as though the forest had become lungs for something that no longer had its own. And still, that voice. Her voice. "We're waiting. We kept your place." Clara stared at the ribbons. She remembered the journal, the final page. The house is inside you now. There was no escaping that. But maybe there was another way. She walked back to the center of the road, standing between her car and the space where the truck had been. The headlights were completely dead. Her reflection in the windshield was gone. The key still sat in the ignition, split in two, humming faintly with the residue of what had been. The black ribbon curled like smoke. The red one pulsed like a heartbeat. Clara lifted both to her throat, tied them together, and let them fall. I am not the house, but I remember it. The wind stopped. The trees froze. The fog lifted all at once, as though sucked back into a hole beneath the earth, and for a moment, the world was still. No breath, no song, no rocking. Then, a whisper, so faint it barely existed. So be it. The road ahead shimmered, then straightened. Trees leaned back. The stars above shifted into unfamiliar constellations, still distant, but watchful.
Clara got into her car, turned the key. The engine started. The ribbons sat on the dashboard, and the mirror above showed only her, smiling. For now.
The car rolled forward slowly, its tires crunching gravel as Clara re-entered a world she no longer trusted. The road ahead unspooled like a ribbon of gray silk, weaving through empty fields and shadowed tree lines. Nothing followed, but something remained. The two ribbons lay on the dashboard, twined, motionless, red and black. They no longer pulsed, no longer shimmered, yet their presence was unmistakable. She reached toward the radio, hesitated, then turned it on. Static at first, then silence, then a faint voice, one she couldn't place. "You'll forget again, you know. It always begins that way." Clara didn't respond. She adjusted the rearview mirror. No shadow, no figure, just the road behind her. But as she stared, she saw it shift slightly, just slightly. The white line down the center of the road in the reflection was curved, twisted. But when she glanced back with her eyes, the real road remained straight. The house might be gone, but its echo wasn't. It had left seeds in her, in the world. And maybe that had been the point all along. She drove through a sleeping town she didn't recognize. Streetlights buzzed overhead. Storefronts wore faded signs in crooked lettering. Windows watched. She didn't stop. In the passenger seat, her phone lit up. A text message. Unknown number. "Do you remember the seventh door?" Her chest clenched. Another message. "You left it open." The screen went black. Clara gripped the wheel tighter. "No," she whispered to the empty road. "I didn't." But even as she said it, doubt slid in like a blade between ribs. Had she closed it? Had she even seen it again after escaping? The world outside her window shimmered faintly. Shapes she couldn't name moved just beyond the trees. She drove faster. Her reflection in the rearview mirror blinked once, when she didn't.
Clara slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop on the empty road, tires shrieking against gravel. Dust rose in the headlights, swirling like fog that had been hiding beneath the surface all along. She stared at the rearview mirror. Her reflection stared back, expressionless, still. Then, slowly, too slowly, it smiled. Her breath hitched. "No, you're gone. I'm out." But the reflection didn't fade. It lifted a hand, not hers, and tapped gently against the glass. 1, 2, 3. The sound echoed in her skull, though her ears heard nothing. She tore her eyes away from the mirror, heart pounding, and fumbled to restart the car's movement. The wheels turned sluggishly at first, as if the vehicle was reluctant to carry her farther, as if the road itself was reluctant to let her leave. The twin ribbons on the dashboard had begun to unravel. Their ends curled toward the windshield, twitching faintly with each bump in the road, like antennae reaching for signal. She shoved them into the glove box and slammed it shut. The radio clicked on. Not static. A melody. That same lullaby. Slower now. Drawn out like a music box winding down, each note dragging behind the next. She turned the volume dial to 0. The music didn't stop. In the distance, lights flickered. Red, then white, then nothing. She approached a crossroad that hadn't been there before. No signs, no names, just two paths. Left, lined with rows of leafless trees. Right, lit by soft gas lamps, the light too steady to be natural, like the promise of comfort in a stranger's smile. And at the center of the fork stood a small wooden sign, with one word carved deep into its surface. Return. She looked down at her lap. The broken key was gone. Only a fresh red ribbon remained, curled in the shape of a question mark. Clara gritted her teeth. No more tricks, no more doors. And yet, she had to choose. Left or right, or stop. But the car was already turning on its own. Clara gripped the wheel, knuckles white, fighting against the turn. The car's frame groaned in protest as she yanked it toward the center of the fork, trying to stop the pull. But it kept drifting, tires drawn slowly to the right, toward the row of gas lamps, their glow too warm, too artificial, like the promise of comfort in a stranger's smile. "No," she hissed, "you don't get to choose from me." She slammed the brakes. The vehicle jolted to a stop, headlights illuminating the signpost once more. Return. A gust of wind swept across the hood, stirring dust and dry leaves, and in its wake, a whisper. "You were always driving in circles." Clara stepped out of the car. The road under her feet felt softer now, less like pavement, more like memory. The air was warmer on the right-hand path, still and scented like lavender and dust. She glanced to the left. Colder. Silent. The trees leaned in there, their branches forming tangled arches like claws held in prayer. Neither path looked like escape, but only one felt like resistance. She turned left. The moment she took her first step, the fog rolled in from behind, swallowing the car, the fork, the sign. She didn't look back. Her boots crunched softly over frostbite and gravel, each footfall echoing with an eerie delay, like someone else walked just behind her, always a breath away. She walked for minutes or hours. Time felt thin here, like a thread stretched too far. Then, a sound. Faint. A whisper of wood on wood. The rocking chair. Clara froze. She was in the woods again. But they weren't woods anymore. They were walls. Bark gave way to paneling. Branches became beams. The sky vanished above her, and when she stepped forward again, she stood at the base of the staircase. The same staircase, with the crawl space door still cracked open beneath it. A ribbon lay on the bottom step. Black. Fresh. Waiting.
Clara stared at the ribbon on the step, breath caught in her throat. It hadn't been there a moment ago. It was tied in a perfect loop, neat, delicate, as if placed by loving hands, or practiced ones, and somehow familiar. She knelt, hesitant, fingertips brushing the fabric. Still warm, still pulsing. It recognized her. The house hadn't rebuilt itself. She had. Piece by piece, memory by memory, with every step she'd taken, every decision she'd made since leaving, she'd carried fragments of it. The hallway, the mirrors, the fire, the lullaby. It had never needed to chase her. It had only needed to wait. The door behind her, the one she had come through, was gone. No trace of the woods, only shadowed corridors now, and above her, the creak of the rocking chair again, back and forth, back and forth. Clara rose slowly and picked up the ribbon. It didn't resist, didn't writhe, it simply was. She opened the crawl space beneath the stairs. The narrow tunnel yawned wide, like a throat rediscovered, and beyond it, the glow of that chamber, the journal, the chair. But this time, the journal lay open already. No blank pages, no drawings, just a single sentence, scrawled across the center in her own handwriting. You didn't choose fast enough. Clara stepped back.
The candlelight guttered, and behind her, on the stairs, footsteps. Small, childlike, the rhythm familiar. She turned. There she was, the girl with the red ribbon, her hair longer now, her face sharper, eyes dark as old glass. "You let it in," the girl said. Clara shook her head, voice weak. "I closed the door, but you left the window open." The house moaned softly around them, like an animal waking from a long sleep, and the girl smiled. "Don't worry. We'll help you remember the rest." Clara stepped back from the crawl space and the open journal, her back brushing the damp wall behind her. The child stood on the stairs, one hand resting lightly on the rail, head tilted slightly, as though studying her. "You've changed," Clara whispered. The girl's smile widened, teeth too perfect, too white. "So have you." She began to descend, slow, barefoot steps that made no sound against the wood, and yet with every step the house seemed to settle deeper around them. The air thickened, the light dimmed. "You're not just me anymore," Clara said. The girl stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "I never was." "Then what are you?" She reached up and tugged the red ribbon loose from her hair. It unraveled like smoke, vanishing as it fell, leaving strands of hair floating around her like tendrils in water. "I'm the piece you left behind." Clara swallowed. "I didn't leave you. I was taken. And I waited. I watched. I learned how to grow without you." The house creaked again, louder this time. Walls bent inward. Shadows stretched across the floor in unnatural directions. "I destroyed the heart," she said, half to herself. "You broke apart. The rest just changed." From upstairs, the lullaby began again, sung by a voice she couldn't place, but she knew its shape. A woman's voice, not her mother, not her grandmother, hers. She looked at the child. Where does the song end? The girl smiled wider than her face should have allowed. It doesn't.
The lullaby wound through the air like smoke, curling around Clara's ears and memories. It wasn't just sound, it was weight. A forgotten cradle, a midnight hallway, a mother's breath just before sleep. Every note carved a groove through her until she wasn't sure whether she was hearing it or remembering it. The child stepped closer. Clara didn't move.
"There's nothing left to fight, is there?" she asked, voice barely above a breath. The girl reached out, gently touching Clara's wrist. Her fingers were ice. "Only yourself." The floorboards beneath them vibrated, not with footsteps, with heartbeat. The heart, Clara realized, had never been a thing. It had been a rhythm, a story, a loop. "Why did you bring me back?" she asked. The child's smile faltered the first time. "I didn't. You did." Clara shook her head. "I didn't want this. But you needed it. The house doesn't come for the unwilling. It comes for the unfinished." The walls began to shift around them, peeling like skin. Wallpaper turned to bark. Ceiling beams curled like roots. The hallway twisted on itself, growing, stretching. Clara looked up the stairs. The 7th door at the end of the hall was open again. Inside glowed a flickering orange light. The same chair, the same mirror, the same choice.
She turned back to the child. "Tell me what happens if I walk through that door again." The girls no longer smiled. "You stay. And if I turn away, then you spread." The lullaby stopped. Everything in the house went still. Then, somewhere behind the walls, the sound of dozens of rocking chairs moving together in perfect rhythm.
The sound of the rocking chairs grew louder. Not a melody, not a rhythm, but a language. Wood against wood, floorboards creaking in layered echoes, each chair telling the same story in its own tempo. Clara didn't need to translate it. She could feel it in her bones. Stay, sit, settle. It was the lullaby's meaning without music. The house didn't need words to command. It had rocked 1,000 souls to stillness over the centuries. Clara stepped away from the child. Her boots pressed into the floorboards, which pulsed faintly under her like skin, alive. The house was no longer pretending to be anything else. It had dropped the illusion of structure. No more cozy corners, no more cracked portraits and whispering mirrors. It was a mouth now, open, waiting. The 7th door at the top of the stairs flickered, its frame warping slightly as though breathing. Light spilled from it, orange and warm, inviting. Clara climbed. The child watched, unmoving, fingers still laced behind her back. Each step Clara took felt heavier. Her shoulders dragged, her hands trembled. The weight of remembering, it was thick now, like fog in her lungs. At the top, she paused. The doorway looked smaller than she remembered. Or perhaps she had grown. The rocking chair sat in the corner, facing the mirror. And now, for the first time, it was full. A woman sat with her back to Clara. Long dark hair spilled over the back of the shawl. Pale hands gripped the wooden arms. The chair moved slowly, back and forth. The woman raised one hand and pointed toward the mirror. Clara stepped forward. The mirror was no longer cracked, and in it she saw nothing. No reflection, just the room behind her. But the girl was gone. So was the hallway. She turned. The door had vanished. Only walls now, and the chair, and the mirror, and her.
Clara stood in the center of the room, caught between the mirror and the chair, between her reflection and the version of herself that no longer moved. The woman in the chair didn't speak, didn't breathe, but she rocked, slowly, deliberately, as though keeping time in a world where time no longer meant anything. The fire in the hearth gave no heat now. Its flames flickered, but their light was cold, an imitation of warmth. The room felt smaller with every heartbeat, the ceiling lower, the shadows longer. The mirror pulsed faintly, like a surface of water under moonlight. Clara stepped closer. No reflection, only the room, the chair, the back of her head, and then movement. In the mirror, the woman rose, but behind her, in the room, the real chair remained still. Clara's breath hitched. The figure in the mirror turned, face first lost in shadow, then clear, her face, but not hers now, hers after. Eyes hollowed, lips bloodless, a smile carved like an old wound. The reflection stepped forward, But when Clara turned, the space behind her was empty. Back to the mirror, she was closer. Another step, and another. Her hands pressed to the inside of the glass. A second pair met them from the other side, perfectly aligned. Cold radiated from the surface. Clara's fingers trembled. "What are you?" she whispered. The mirror self tilted her head. "I'm what you could have become if you'd stayed." "I didn't stay." The smile returned, wider now. "Didn't you?" Clara stepped back, but the mirror didn't release her hands. She looked down. They weren't on glass anymore. They were inside it. Elbows sinking into the surface like mud. The reflection's smile widened as she began to pull. Back into the house, back into the memory, back into the mirror. Clara struggled. The glass clung to her arms like cold syrup, dense, unyielding. Her elbows sank further, dragged by invisible hands, her skin tingling with the electric pulse of the house's will. "No!" she shouted, thrashing backward. "You don't get to take me!" The mirror shimmered violently, the image of her twisted reflection warping and snarling with effort. Fingers gripped her forearms from beneath the surface, her fingers, but longer, bonier, stained with something dark. "You never left," the voice whispered from within the glass. Clara wrenched back with all her strength, teeth clenched, lungs burning. With a wet pop, her arms broke free. She stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floorboards. They pulsed beneath her again, but slower now, strained, like the house had spent too much of itself pulling her in and couldn't quite hold form anymore. She looked up. The mirror cracked. A thin line formed from the top to the bottom, a spider vein of fracture, then another, dozens of them. Her reflection twisted into a kaleidoscope of wrongness. The woman in the chair had vanished. The fire had died. Only Clara remained, breathing hard, shaking, alive. She pulled herself to her feet. Her limbs ached, her fingers numb, but she was whole. She turned in a slow circle. Still no door, but something had changed. The wallpaper peeled away at the edges. The mirror hissed. The air no longer smelled of lavender and damp earth, but smoke, burnt timber. She stepped toward the window, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, sunlight. Weak, watery but real. Morning. The sky beyond was gray-blue and open. The world outside existed, still waiting, still turning. The house trembled around her, walls shuddering, beams groaning. It was breaking, finally. And as she reached for the window latch, the floor beneath her whispered with 1,000 voices, "You'll forget again. You always do. We'll be waiting." Clara opened the window and stepped through.
Clara's boots landed in wet grass. Real grass. Morning dew soaked her cuffs. A soft breeze stirred the willow branches overhead, and bird song, fragile and distant, greeted her ears like a language long forgotten. She turned back toward the house, but it wasn't there. Not even a footprint remained where it had stood. Only the willow, and the marsh, and the silence of a place that no longer remembered being haunted. She breathed deep. The air burned her lungs in the best way. Clean. Alive. Her hands trembled as she lifted them, expecting blood, dust, fragments of keys or ribbon, but they were empty. No marks. No signs of what had passed. Even the red and black ribbons were gone. The weight of them, however, remained. She staggered toward her car. It was still where she left it, tires slightly sunken into the earth as though they'd waited there for years. Its surface was streaked with pollen and dust. She opened the door, slid inside, and stared at the rearview mirror. Her reflection stared back. No delay, no smile. Just her. Tired. Changed. Whole. The key was still in the ignition. She turned it. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The radio came on. Static. Then silence. Then a new sound. Not a lullaby. Waves. Rolling gently. The sea. She didn't remember programming it, but she didn't turn it off. Her fingers hovered over the glove box. She opened it slowly. Inside, only an old matchbook. Faded gold lettering across the front read, "The Fog House, 7th door reserved." She picked it up, turned it over. No matches, just one small note tucked inside. Her own handwriting. 4 words. If it calls, run. The road ahead opened wide and empty, stretching into the waking world. And behind her, the willows bowed goodbye.